So Donovan Stone here, and accompanied by Beau Ruggieri from Dreamtsoft. We're going to keep these meetings going. Our last one came out a week ago, and we thought this one would be a good time to get a little bit more technical and talk kind of about the foundational web-based building blocks of Dreamtsoft. And basically, it's going to be components. We'll discuss them a little bit at the beginning, just kind of the theory and how they came to be, and then we'll dive into a little more technical deep dive on how to build them, how they're used, etc. Sound like a good plan?
Yeah, that sounds like a good. Oh, sorry, I was just brushing up on my reading here. Yeah, a very important subject to me. Yeah, we'll go over. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Actually, I'll give you a little background, and then I'll share my screen. So components are one of the core pieces of the Dreamtsoft platform that kind of really brings everything together and makes it like really extendable and modular. So a component's kind of like a little, it's a unit of something. So the system has various types of components. I think right now we have probably 6 or 7 different types of components, and I'll kind of go over that and you know, we'll try not to get too much in the weeds because there's a lot to discuss, and I know we're just going to go for the 30-minute video here. But you know, basically, you think of a component as is a bundle of code to do something. So one of the most popular components we have is what's called a page component. So that page component is basically a square, you know, a container on a page that does something. So one example would be the list page component. So its job is to render a list on a page. Another one we have is called a details page component. So that details page component is the form. And then you can imagine there's more and more. So we have a chart page component, and that's you know, our charting where we're using chart.js, you know, pie charts, bar charts, line charts. So that's kind of the like the page components. And I'll take a little kind of a backup. So when I first started building this platform, you know, I knew I wanted to make it modular. You know, I knew that, you know, I wanted to make it so you know, end users, customers, whoever could build applications on top of the platform, which we call bundles. So if you were to kind of get down and actually look at a bundle, a majority of that bundle is a bunch of components that are kind of included in that bundle or that application. So if you were to look at, like, you know, our base bundle, which is kind of our out of the box, that's kind of like the would be like the kernel of the platform. That's the thing that boots up, that has all the, you know, tables that knows there's users and all the base security and stuff like that. But if you were to look at that bundle, you would see there's page components that have like the lists and the forms and stuff like that. But you know, going back to what I was saying is I knew that, you know, it was very important and fundamental for us to break out each of the units of those, you know, components of modulars, whatever you want to call it, knowing that, you know, you can add more in over time. You know, you'll go from a version 1 of a component to a version 2 of a component. So, you know, just being able to make it modular was really important to, I thought, to the core, you know, architecture of the system. And you know, fast forward today is you know, we definitely benefit from a lot, and it is basically one of the, you know, fundamental core pieces of the platform.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of other like SaaS things out there that allow the, I guess, flexibility. Because pretty much the whole platform's open because it's all components dropped on a page. So you can configure, from what I've seen, either build your own component or, you know, go in there and kind of copy one and change something that we have that a current component does. So.
Yeah, and it does make it, I mean, I think it makes it also, you know, kind of easier to understand what, you know, kind of that component, what parts it's using, because it's all kind of confined into the same area. So, you know, when I first started the platform, I was, you know, kind of had that idea in mind, and I knew, kind of looking on the internet, I knew there was the web components that were, you know, kind of starting to come to light. And, you know, now in, you know, 2021, those those are, more and more used. So that was kind of the base of, I thought, okay, a web component seems like a good way to bundle up like a unit of code and style and stuff like that. So that's naturally, I thought, okay, that's, the pattern I want to follow. But since the platform is, not only, client side, it's not only the browser, we're also doing a lot of stuff in the back end, a lot of, server side JavaScript. I knew that I kind of had to, take that, what I thought were kind of the good ideas of that web component and build on top of it to make sure that it also supported patterns of, being able to define stuff. So, server side is also, included in that architecture.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's client side functionality, there's server side functionality, and it's wide open to like the frameworks or the technologies, right? Like you can bring in something else that's already out there, whether it's a package.
Yeah, definitely. Like when it comes to components, it's and I'll bring up. Let me just actually bring up this share this real quick because it probably will make more sense. Okay, so here's a from one of the architectural decks that I created. Kind of just a high level of kind of to get you in the right mindset of components. So when you're loading the platform and it's SaaS based, you have the browser. There's a single page, full page load at the beginning, and then everything after that are just simple REST AJAX calls to load just subset of datas. Called a single page app. 10, 12 years ago. I don't know if it's still referred to as that, but so in this example, you'll see it's common. You'll have a page, and then you'll have, and this one kind of, there's two components on it. This 2-page components. So you have this left side and this right side. So this is kind of illustrating this whole box right here is a component. This whole box here is a component. So that would be page components. Another type of component we have is called a widget component. So widget components usually live in page components. So you can think of a widget component as nothing more than like a form input. So, often we might refer to them as form input components. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we name them widget components so long ago, it's so engraved in the system that that's kind of its name and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But you can think of a widget component, again, he has kind of the same, platform physics where he's given a container and he's told to render it. Now, the difference between a page component and a widget component is a page component's given that container, he's told to render in, and then he's just kind of done, maybe waiting for some events. Versus a widget component, he knows he's part of a form. So his job is really to say, I'm going to take a value, and then I'm going to take that value and display it in the form, user-friendly, and then I'm going to allow the user to tweak it. And then when the user is done tweaking it, I'm going to turn it back into a value. So a good example of that would be the date widget, the date widget component, if you want to use the full name. So his job, he gets essentially an integer along of the date in milliseconds, which nobody in their right mind can read. So his job is to take that, run it through some kind of time moment, some kind of formatter, and display it in the proper form or the proper format, usually in the proper time zone. Allow you to change it, click on it, maybe change the date. And then when you've changed it, his job also is now to take the feedback that you did and serialize it back into that, time in milliseconds. So that's kind of a simple example of a widget.
So just to recap that, so you've got that big integer sitting in the database, and then when the page loads, it loads a page component, and inside that page component is a widget component, and that widget component is taking the big long integer, converting it to Friday, January 13th or whatever today is, and displaying it to the user, and it can also take any changes, any updates, and then send that back to the database.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me share my screen here, my browser screen too.
15th, so I'm a few days behind.
So in the example, when you're in Dreamtsoft and you are on any page, basically everything every screen you see, you are on a page in Dreamtsoft. We try to be consistent with the terms. You can think of it as just like when you're on a website, you're on an HTML page. So in Dreamtsoft, you're on a page. So in this particular case, you can always look in the URL. It's on the top. So this one's on the DS-based homepage. So the little customized page thing here in the lower left will kind of give you a good outline that says, I'm on this homepage and it only has one thing, which is the navigator page component. Versus like if I go into something, like if I go into, let's say groups, you will see on this one, I am a page under a page. So I'm home and then I'm on the list. So the page is the list default group and it has one component on the list. If I were to go in here, I'd see this page component is using 100%, 100%. Versus if you go into something a little more complex, like the IT service management page, show the pencil, I'll see this page is pretty complex with all the different components, page components that it has on it.
So those are all
a pretty good gist of how things are laid out. Sorry,
so those are all page components, and I don't want to jump ahead, but could you quickly show what a widget page component would be, just so everybody knows the difference?
Yep. So in this particular case, I got page components. I'll just click on this. This is showing me, I'll go to my incident list, and I'll click new here. So when this brings up the form, these are the widget components here, like company, requested by, location, right? And so all these are different. So for example, this title is just a normal string widget component. So, versus the one that's right below it is called a big string. The only difference between the two is a big string knows, hey, there's going to be a more amount of data. So I want to use a text area to render it versus the titles. Like I just want to use a regular, HTML input. You can start getting into other things too. Often in, any kind of SaaS, enterprise MSP type software, you always run into references, right? That's, I have some data that's pointing in a different bucket or it's pointing in a different location. So like these are obviously references. So this is, the type ahead type of notion. So this widget uses, starts out with a little HTML input here and then looks for you typing. And then when you type, it adds a little drop down. Let me pop back in there. Another one on this page would be a drop down, right? I have a set of choices that I want to choose from. So this widget just has, provides a set of drop down. And if you were to kind of, get in and look at the system, there's a bunch of different types of widgets. And we'll cover a couple more if time permits, but ultimately the idea around a widget is, hey, it's going to be rendered on a form. It's going to display a value in a user-friendly way, knowing that the user is going to be modifying it, and then taking whatever modifications they have and turn it back into a value. So in the end, it's kind of like I often refer to it as a value to display value converter back into a value.
Awesome.
Let's jump in a little bit on, I'll lightly cover what a component looks like, because I think it will add a little bit more context and a little more understanding to a component. So let me go back here. Share this screen.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, there was a video I made of a joke application just to show kind of integrations. But in there, we touch on building a component. And we'll go more into it here, at least show some inner workings. But that's also a way I built a component that was able to kind of create a joke of the day application, or a component actually that I drug on a page.
Yeah.
There's another example. And I mean, since Dreamtsoft is built on components, there's going to be a lot of examples of components in every video we do and every time we are doing these types.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up this. What you're seeing here is actually a little sidebar. We have a Visual Studio Code plugin that we use for connecting to the F8 platform. So often it just makes it a little easier. Visual Studio Code's a good formatter IDE to kind of help development, as opposed to just doing it on the command line or doing it like a text pad or something like that. And another sidebar, all this stuff is stored in Git repositories, so you could use pretty much any IDE that you wanted to, and that supports Git. Internally development, we used to go back and forth between Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ. In the past, we used Eclipse, kind of whatever you're comfortable with. But so this is the, I'll just show this one is the Worktopbar component. So what you'll basically find is that there's a components directory, and underneath there, in this particular case, there's bundle components. We got a little bit of technical debt we're fixing here, but basically all the components besides the page components are in one directory. But that's not really too important for this video. But so the Worktopbar component, you can see the ideas that you are kind of defining the definition, you're defining the attributes, which I'll get into in 1 second, the style, and then the script to the component, kind of all in one HTML file. If you look, a lot of the newer components that we write, we've been doing in React and Vue. So as part of the platform, out of the box, we do provide like just a simple templating language. I forget the name off the top of my head. And then we also have React, and then we also have Vue. The beauty of the components is you can actually write one component in React and another component in Vue. And we still have some components that are also jQuery. So, and they all kind of just work with each other because they're self-contained in themselves. And again, they have one job, they're given a container and they render in that container. And from the platform standpoint, he doesn't really care, what framework you're using to do that.
So they don't collide or anything?
No.
Okay.
So in this example, you could see the attributes. Definitely want to go over that. So the attributes are basically a way of defining kind of, here are the parameters, or here are the inputs that this component could have or is expecting. So it's kind of the dynamic toggle, the dynamic switches you could define that allow the end user to kind of, check something down, pull something down to change the behavior of that component. So in this particular case, it's defining a couple things in this one. It's defining, this one's a bucket list, what query, record query, and life cycle, whether to show the life cycle or not. Sorry. And actually, let me share my screen so I can actually go over this real quick.
Yeah, and one thing I definitely would like you to touch on too is that secret widget manager builder at one point when you're done, just because that is a little hidden gem that that I often forget about, and I think it can be very helpful when building out those attributes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Okay. Can you see the?
I've got your browser and your
okay.
Yeah.
So in this case, this is the Worktopbar component. So if I actually want to see this in action, we use this one right now in our intake process. So to reiterate, I think we went over the intake a little bit on the last video, but the intake's kind of the way that MSPs, when a ticket is coming in, it's known as a ticket, but really it needs to get translated into an incident or a request, or something, or a piece of demand, like a nice to have. And often, if these intakes will come in through like an email, or it'll come in, obviously someone can answer the phone, man, I lost my train of thought there. What's the third way? Email,
portal.
That doesn't. We'll have to chop that out. Okay. So the intake is an example where we use this bar component. So if I go into one of these, and I look at this ticket, I'll see up here is that actual that page component. So if I hover here, again, you see the page, you see all the components on it. In this case, on the intake form, we have the Worktopbar, we have our chat box, which is the going back and forth with the user that you're communicating with, designed in the fashion of like a Teams or like a Slack. And then the details, that's like, the actual form of what you're working on. So, but for this example, what you'll see is I'm going to show you these attributes that define the behavior. If I go and I edit this, these are the attributes. So this Worktopbar, he needs a couple things to render. So he needs to know, hey, what's the bucket that I'm going to get my information from? And what's the query that I'm going to get my information from? And should I show the life cycle? Because in this case, he's saying, okay, here is the ticket number and here is the short description. So he obviously needs to know what bucket, what record that's coming from in order to show.
So if you flag that, show the life cycle and hit OK, then that life cycle will just.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to show. So this show life cycle. So right now on it, he also handles showing the life cycle. Like that's the current state of this record. But I could go in here, I could say Worktopbar, there's an attribute show life cycle. So I can turn this off and then load it, and it will no longer show that life cycle up here. The idea around those attributes, like I said, are inputs or parameters that are used to really allow the end user, when they're using that component, to twist and turn the knobs to allow it to do other things. So as the author of a component, you basically take into consideration, well, what are all the different ways I want this to display? What are, the things that could turn on or off? And you create attributes out of that, and then you expose it to the end user of the platform so that they can, turn those things on and off.
Gotcha. So yeah, that makes it easier, because the more components we put out, or even if our customers build, the more Lego blocks we have to assemble. And a lot of times I've started to try and build something, and then Bo points out, oh, well, we already have a component that does that. All you have to do is go in, change a few attributes, and it'll do what you're looking for. So it makes it applicable, not only even in the ITSM world, but if people are building other apps that are doing other business processes, you can kind of hijack or utilize those other components and use them for building your app. And that's the idea. Ideally, we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of these components, and you can pick from them, drag them over, configure them with a dropdown, and then you're building your app.
I guess it's pretty easy to chew up 30 minutes talking about this stuff. But I kind of wanted to lightly go over some of the other component types, just because we've gone over obviously the page component. We've also done the widget component. Some other components that we have are an action component. So that is the way where we allow the end user, and then also add a box to be able to add different actions to our workflow stuff. So, it's extendable when you're, building a workflow, you're connecting the boxes together. We follow the same pattern that you can create a action component, and you can have those attributes, and you're basically exposing that to the end user to use in a workflow. And let me pop over here and see if I can find a decent example of that. Let me share my screen. Okay. So here's a list of actions that we have. Browser actions are the ones where we expose the buttons, and that's kind of like the way to build a client-side flow, because in our platform, there's server-side, there's client-side, there's various flows you could build. But for this example, we'll kind of go over the browser action. So if we look, I'll just click this plus and filter on the browser action. And we'll just open this cancel incident one. I think this is yours, Donovan, that you wrote. So hopefully it's beautiful. So if we look at this action, it's a pretty simple flow here. So you have the start box, you have a confirmation box, and you have a set value box. So these actually are components themselves. These are action components. So if I were to look at this confirmation, I double click, it's going to bring up, it's going to say, what the name is, the message type, the message, what's the OK button? Should I show the cancel button? Again, these are just all attributes of a component. Same pattern of the page component and a widget component. The only difference is this is actually in a workflow. So he's not rendering in a box. He's not rendering on a form. he's being used in the workflow. And if we were to hop over and look at this one real quick, I'll hop in my IntelliJ for this one. This confirmation box, again, you'll see the same thing. Definition, I have attributes, these are the things you just saw on the form. The type, right, it's a choice, so this is a drop down, the message, okay button. And this stuff, obviously being an action component, we're not doing anything React or anything. This is just doing, client side JavaScript. So in this particular case, it's using kind of the variables that you set, those attributes to determine how to render that confirmation box. Toasty! So that's action components. So we've done, page components, widgets components, action components. A couple others would be form extension components. So when you are on a form like this one right here, again, you have the widgets here, but sometimes you want something on a form that is not a widget. That's where the form extension components come in. That are, things like, an annotation or a divider. So a divider, we can, if we want to say, hey, let's throw a divider, right down between these two. Again, it's going to pop up the screen, ask some questions, have some inputs. These are attributes. So my divider, I'll throw this on form, save this. So now it's going to reload the form. And now the form basically was laid out with a bunch of widget components. And then with that divider form extension component here. If I were to look at that, you can see that there is a divider here. And it follows the same exact pattern as the other components. What gets a little inception or a little meta is when I'm in here looking at this form extension component, he has widget components that he's rendering to define the attributes. So, as a good friend of mine, David Liu, used to say, a self-eating watermelon. It's basically kind of, going into itself to render itself. You'll find the same thing when you're actually, if I were to go into any of these widget components, like the description here, and I double click this, right? This is telling me, hey, the type is an I18N string. So this, is meant for translation. And then here are the attributes for this description widget component. And the attributes themselves are widget components. Think about that for a while. This would be like in your head, the little spinning wheel of death. So that would be, so far that was, like I said, the page, widget, action, form extensions. We have a handful more of components. There's auth ones. I won't get into that because we don't have enough time, but that's kind of dealing with, authentication, overriding on authentication to do it in different fashions as opposed to this username and password. We have a security component where you basically are tying into our security engine. So by default, we have row-based security where, this group could read, this group could write. But if you created a bucket and you wanted to specifically have completely custom security that doesn't follow that pattern, you can create a security component. And the latest ones we talked about in the last video are the integration components. And those are meant to, it's kind of the start of organizing all the integrations that we have. Because right now, a lot of our integrations are just following this the require module type pattern, where we have a bunch of JavaScript that we wrote that does HTTP REST calls for doing a lot of the integrations. So we identified a pretty cool pattern on how to take that and wrap it in an integration component. And I'll bring one up here. We got it's in service management, final components, and then integration. So in this one in service management, we have a pretty good one built out on End Central, SolarWinds End Central. So you can see, again, I know I sound like a broken record here, but same pattern, attributes, you're defining those. Where this is a little different is these, we added a notion where you could define the APIs. So in this particular case, N-Central has like an API called get device. So we kind of go into a little more depth here where we say API, here's the description, here's the attributes for that API. So we're kind of exposing what that API is expecting. And the other subtle difference between these integration components is they don't have any script built into it. In this particular case, there is, we have a class name defined where the script is right next to it. And if you were to look in here, it basically, go back here, you can see the ID is customer list in this component. So there is a corresponding API customer list here in the server-side JavaScript. So, so if you were to look at this N-Central one, it's basically all the APIs for getting the assets or getting machines, the computers out of N-Central, which is a pretty popular package to use for the MSPs. It's a good package, great package to use for the MSPs. And that's kind of the bridge on, one of the things we're seeing in a lot of the MSPs, wanting to get more of a formalized CMDB, because a lot of the legacy software they're using right now doesn't really have a notion of a CMDB. So this N-Central integration we use to go over to N-Central, we get all the stuff out of N-Central. N-Central is still the trusted source. We just, synchronizing every few hours, but then we're storing it into the CMDB in our service management. So then you can reference it through your various ITIL practices.
Yeah. One point that I've always run into, and this may be common knowledge, but just want to point out is, Bo, if you want to jump back into any client component, but as far as the script goes, using that template language on the client side, you don't want to put any script basically in the template. I was notorious for this, basically cutting and pasting a lot of examples on the internet. So Bo, can you jump into that, maybe that N-Central client?
Okay, yeah. Oh, this one doesn't have any templates in it though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let me just jump into I'll just jump into a basic component. Components.
So a lot of times I would just grab a big chunk of script, somewhere off the internet, and you would have all your HTML, and in the middle of it is your script. And I would actually get it to work, but you don't want to do that. And Bo is about to tell you why.
Well, so this is an example of when I was mentioning before, there's a couple different out of the box frameworks we allow. So this is actually the first one that I started with. It's just a simple JavaScript templating language. I forget where I got it from, but the idea was I didn't want to necessarily cement the platform into a specific framework when I started building the platform. So I just wanted like a simple one that was kind of like a ASP PHP that could kind of just get me going until I had enough of the groundwork, the frameworks laid out, where then I could start introducing some of the other types. So in this particular case, it's pretty simple, right? It's HTML intermixed with these, less than and greater than percents. But so this is for a template. So, obviously templates are, reusable pieces of HTML. But in this particular case, so this would be a template, related tags, and you could put your HTML here. Often what, Donovan does is sometimes he'll just go on the internet and he'll just copy and paste an example of something, because and nowadays it's actually super simple, when you're using a platform like Dreamtsoft and you're doing the, rapid application building, just to go to the internet, find an example, open a component, paste it in the component, and then you have basically a piece of that page that's now using that example that you're using, which is great for testing, great for learning. But when you actually want to go and create, productize it, make sure it's nice and clean, knowing that, the customers are going to use it. That's when you kind of go into the exercise of, formulating it to fit into our component structure. So one of the common patterns is a lot of times you go online and you'll see, an example of something, and inside of it, there'll be, HTML, and then there'll be a script tag that does some JavaScript. And you can paste it in here and it would work. It's just, looking at it architecturally gets a little sloppy, because these templates are meant to be used in the below script here, right? This is the client script to a page component. So this is basically saying when this loads, the onload, that means I'm getting called page component, I'm getting called the load, and I have a this.container and I have a this.attributes. And that's, attributes are obviously the things you define, containers where you're supposed to render. So the idea with the templates is that, really you want to, call some of our APIs and say, oh, this.template, I want to use this template and I want to put it on this container. And this is where you're already doing the script, you're already, looking for, looking in the DOM, doing whatever you're doing. So, as I tell Donovan, it's a little, it's not too clean to be putting the script in here. It really should be, part of the overarching client side to the component.
Yeah, and it makes it a little bit easier too when you pull it out, and then you can also do, Ajax calls back to that other JS file. So if there's certain things you can't do on the client, it really kind of opens it up and makes it easier to manage. And it's not that hard just to literally like lift it and shift it and put it down in a function down below.
Yeah. And this is, like I said, this is an example of the older templating language. Like I said, out of the box, we also do, React and Vue. So like I could go, if I look at this list client, right, this is the list page component. That's what, is on a lot of the pages you're on because you're looking at a list. If I go to the bottom of this, you'll see this actually will just, as opposed to defining the React in here, since usually you want to run it through the preprocessor, this just calls out to an external module that's right next to it. So you just using a standard require and saying, hey, I want to require this list component, which is right here next to it in a module, content module directory, just like you'd expect. There's a list, es6.js component, and this is React code, just like you'd expect out of React code in the list component. And then I can go same directory, same component structure, but hey, you know what? I want to look at the user profile one is a good example. Let's look at this one. This has, the definition, the style down here. It's actually saying I want to require this, but it's a view component. So in this particular case, it's saying, hey, I want to use the user profile component. So again, content directory, modules, open this, but this one's view. So it's a pretty neat little architecture we got here where, you can kind of leave it up to the person writing the components, like what language they want to write it in. Obviously, being in development, you kind of want to standardize because you want other developers to, fix other developers' bugs. Not that that ever happens, but that's what you want as a utopia. So you're usually kind of consistent about the language that you're choosing, but it is possible larger teams are, if you want to use one or the other, or another one that we actually have some customers using is Angular. We don't even have that in the platform, but the end user or one of our customers just included it in their bundle, their application. They include Angular, and then they start writing their components in Angular.
That's awesome. So yeah, if there's some sort of next generation framework comes out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good point, because that's what I always like to tell people. There's very few things, when you're trying to write like a platform, a framework, something that is generic, and that you got to kind of like think things are going to be built on top of it. The number one thing is there's always going to be change. There's always going to be newer technology. So when I was building this platform, I really, part of the whole component piece was like, hey, I know these things are going to change. I know that, back when I started, like Angular was super popular. And then here comes the waves, here comes some new startups, here comes some improvements to React, here comes some improvements to Vue. So, the only thing guaranteed are these languages are going to change the way of writing, these interfaces. Back in the day, there was no such thing as a data store, but now, it's popular for the data stores and writing tests. And so knowing all that stuff is going to change, and applying it to this, kind of component architecture, I think really has allowed us to move quickly and not have to predict the future. We just know, hey, when something else comes out, we can either include it in the platform, or we could just say, hey, if you want to use it, just create your own application include it in that application, then you can start using it in your components.
Gotcha. Okay. Well,
it's probably a good note to end on. I know we went over 30 minutes.
Definitely over 30 minutes. Let's wrap this up, put a bow on it, as they say. So obviously for the MSPs that are watching this might be a little bit more development heavy, but it kind of gives you an idea of how flexible the platform is and really how we built our MSP solution on top of this platform. You know, we have obviously the standard service desk applications, and as we're evolving into more of the agreements and invoicing and quoting, we're using all of the same components that we built: incident, problem change, intake, asset management, to manage sales process, agreements, invoicing. But it also showcases that you can extend this and build out something that does not live in the platform, and you have that capability. So if you were to, be a deep dive administrator for Dreamtsoft, you could build your own component. Just like I did in that joke of the day video. It's a different way maybe to render data that lives in the Dreamtsoft database or interact with it. So, don't think that you're limited by the amount of components. We obviously want to keep producing as many components we can, because that makes it easier for you guys, our customers, to be able to drag and drop components and then just set attributes. But because of the platform underneath, if there isn't something there, there's a lot more speed and agility we have to be able to kind of whip it up and then present it back to you and put that back into the product.
Yeah, so, and I, just to kind of to end on that note, you're absolutely right. Modifying, creating components, as an MSP, you might never do. You might not want to do. You might not want to take on that, that burden of having to support something that you created. But it is there, and we definitely want to show you kind of what is in the background of the product to know, to kind of show you, hey, we put some serious thought into this architecture to be able to do the things that you might need to do one day, and be able to change quickly as we need to change. And ultimately, you're looking at the MSP kind of, the market and the people involved. We know there's a lot of, community, there's a lot of people sharing. So, yeah. The last piece I kind of wanted to touch on was the fundamental idea around the components was that people could write them on their own and share them. So the idea is if you just hated how our list was laid out and you think you could write a better list, go for it. And if you want to share that list with the rest of the MSP community and use that list as opposed to ours, we encourage that.
And not only encourage it, but we enable it too, because you can push those changes up to GitHub, and you could make it a public repository, and you could have other MSPs saying, oh, that's cool, and then pull it down, and then they could use it in theirs.
Yep, exactly.
Great.
Cool. Well, I think I'm going to get back to my important reading here. There's a really good article on something. So
nice. Do we get any of the voice?
No.
Nah. All right. Well,
Zoe.
That's one of the fun of having a 2-year-old, huh?
Yep, exactly.
All right. Well, we're going to keep pumping these out, hopefully once a week. So if you want to make some comments, please do. We're going to try and answer them. We may even answer them with another video. If you have any requests on some videos that maybe there's some things that are confusing you or you want to see more of, definitely shoot us an email. Go to our website, maybe make a comment on one of these YouTube videos, and we'll try and turn one out on the subject that you're looking for. Other than that, appreciate you watching it, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.